This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Thanks for joining me. Man, these episodes, we're just racking them up. One great guest after another. And today we're going to talk about Master Storytelling. That's the book by Mark Carpenter. You can scan it right there. Of course, we are also live on Amazon. I'm looking over here. Amazon looks like there's a deal going on currently for $3.99. So scan on over there. And I think that's probably the Kindle version, but I don't know. But it looks like there's a deal going on. So it's fantastic to see. And just a friendly reminder, while we're talking about Amazon, you can also listen to the Business Storytelling Show on Amazon Music for free. So if you haven't checked that out, scan on over, take a look, see if you like that. Of course, you can listen everywhere else too, but why not just bring that up since we're talking about going live on the Amazon live streaming platform. All right, today we want to talk about how do we, as leaders, as people, how do we tell better stories to connect with employees, to connect with our stakeholders, our teams, direct reports. And this is more important than ever because here's the thing. In the at-will North American culture, you have to build teams for teams to stick around. The end. I'm sticking to it. It's a two-way street, my friends. So how do we do that? How do leaders tell stories to build those connections and become master storytellers? All right, let's get Mark on the show here. Really excited to talk to him today. Mark, welcome.
Welcome to you. Thank you so much for having me here, Christoph.
Really appreciate you fitting us into your busy schedule. I know you're doing these workshops right and left, back to back to back, and I really appreciate you making the time. Now, tell us about master storytelling. So first of all, my little ramble there. I mean, am I totally off base, or is that really an important thing leaders need to think about? And if so, how do they do it, and why do they need to?
Well, I love the point that you made there in the intro about we as leaders need to build teams to retain teams. And I see storytelling as an underutilized but key leadership skill to help do that. We often, in leadership positions, and I was guilty of this at times too, we'd explain things, we'd say, well, this is what needs to be done, or this is the data, or here's the goal. But we didn't explain the why. And storytelling is a great way to explain the why, where you're going to capture the minds and hearts of your team so you're going to work more effectively together. And people typically don't leave companies. People leave their bosses. They leave their leaders. And so if you want to be a more effective leader, explaining that why and really uniting the team around the why that you're doing things is very impactful, very powerful as a leader. And storytelling is a skill that all of us can learn to help do that.
I mean, it's very true. It's interesting though, because people leave their leaders, but I mean, you never know what the other leader is like, right? I mean, the grass might not be greener on the other side. And the other thing too is, even when you have very public leaders, I mean, like right now, Mark, you're getting my podcast voice, right? This is not my voice that I use in a meeting, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just a little bit different. Like, I'm not going to be as animated, right? So if they love this version of me, do they like the maybe a little bit calmer version on a Zoom call, right? So it's kind of like, but how do you know you're going to somebody who actually wants to build a better story with you than not?
Yeah, and sometimes that's hard. I say a lot of times for the interviewing process, storytelling is really important, both for the interviewer and the interviewee. If I'm applying for a job and somebody says, well, we have a really strong culture here around teamwork, how do you feel about teamwork? I can say, oh yeah, teamwork's really important to me. Or I could tell the story that illustrated how teamwork is important to me. At the same time, if I'm interviewing you for a job, I might want to tell you the story of this is what teamwork looks like here within our team. And if I can tell that story in a way that resonates with you, then you're more likely to want to be joining the team and committed to it and feel more comfortable with it. At the same time, if I tell you that story and you go, ooh, yeah, I'm not really into that teaming thing, then I might weed you out as a candidate that I don't want on my team in the first place. So I think storytelling is a great way for us to connect as people right from the beginning of the process as you're building that team.
It's interesting to me. I mean, I was kind of chuckling here in the background as you were talking about somebody might say, yeah, team building, not my thing. I can't imagine anybody to say that in a job interview, quite frankly. But who knows, right? I've seen worse things or whatever, crazier things in job interviews. But when you were just talking about that, I was picturing police officers. And I know sometimes they take heed for all the questions they ask, right? But they ask the questions to see if you even know what you're talking about, right? So like, where are you coming from? Oh, from home. Oh, where do you live? And if you don't even have an answer to that simple question, right? It's like something is amiss. So you can just ask questions, right? Yeah, I like to build a team. Oh, cool. How have you done that before? Oh, yeah, that's how I have done it before. How about you, Mr. or Mrs. Leader? Right? I mean, you can ask those questions.
Yep.
But sometimes leaders don't get the benefit of people asking them questions and they have to do it on their own. So, how do they tell better stories and how do they know what's the right story to kind of throw at people?
Yeah, and I always like to emphasize the point that when we talk about telling stories, we're not talking about making up fables or, writing a
Yep.
business fairy tale or anything like that. As powerful as some of those are, but we're talking about taking your own experiences and crafting them in a way with intentionality that leads to a point that you're trying to make. So the first thing is just recognizing which of my experiences can be great stories, could turn into stories to make the points that I'm trying to make. And so watch for those. Watch for the things in your life that happen that you have an emotional reaction to, whether it's anger or frustration or joy or sorrow or any kind of emotional reaction that you have to something. There's likely a lesson that's in there. So look around for the stories that you want to tell or the points that you need to make, and look for those experiences you have that actually will help drive those points home. And then it's about intentionally crafting it into a story to teach, lead, sell, or inspire. That's really the subtitle of the book, and the emphasis that we have for leaders is it's not storytelling just to tell stories, but with a purpose, and to be intentional about this is the purpose that I'm trying to make. And in our workshop, that's what we teach people is how do you structure that into an intentional story that helps you to achieve your goals and to get your points across in a powerful way.
I think intentional is the important keyword there. But I think a lot of leaders do struggle with that. Even the people that do try to share their own experiences. I mean, I'm thinking when you were just talking, I'm thinking of this one conversation I had, and this leader was really and definitely or an executive really, really good at telling stories and having like their own personal experiences. But the way those stories were told, it was just like, oh my God, what is the point? Get to the point. Like, you're not even dragging me along. Do you know what I'm talking about? And they're just like, every single detail and this and this and this. And I
Yeah.
tilted my head to the right and to the left before I took a left turn on the street, which was then going around the hill because I was in Southern. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what's
Yeah.
the point of that story? Why does that happen?
Yeah, it happens because there's a difference between sharing an experience and actually telling a story with an intent, with a purpose. And what you're describing is what people do when they share an experience. And they give all the details that happened within this experience. And you get to the end and you go, okay, why did I waste 5 minutes of my life listening to that? I don't know even where that went. But if I had an experience that actually makes a point that I'm trying to make, and I know what that point is, it's that intentionality again. If I am intentionally telling a story to make this point, that's going to help me edit out those irrelevant things that don't help to make that point in the story. So I'm not going to talk about I tilted my head to the left, I tilted my head to the right, I went around this corner, because those things aren't going to be relevant to my point. I'm going to get specifically to the point that I'm trying to make. I was just in a workshop, I was just leading a workshop around this. And it was really funny as people were practicing their stories. I had somebody who said, oh, I need to leave that out next time. They realized in the moment that's not going to serve the purpose of this story. But people don't get focused on the intent first. They just start sharing the experience, thinking, oh, this was an interesting thing that happened to me, and hoping that there's some point that comes out of it. But then you leave the listeners in the situation you were just talking about going, why am I listening to this? Why are you telling me all these details? So again, it kind of starts and ends with knowing the intent that you have in sharing that story.
I think some leaders, maybe back in the day when it was truly command and control, they're just too used to, oh, I'm the boss. You got to listen to my story. The end, but they don't realize the problem that can create if that story doesn't resonate. Let's talk about that for a little bit. I mean, I can see it unfold a couple different ways, right? But on both sides of the spectrum, you have people really feel your story. They feel your perspective and all that stuff, and it helps you build that bond, right? And then on the other side, you have the people that go, oh my God, do I have to listen to one more thing from this person's life? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you balance that? And then also, how do you figure out when you have to, update what you're doing and you have people on the wrong side of the spectrum?
Well, and that's a great thing about using stories that come from your real life experience is you continue to have your real life experiences. So you can continue to add to that bank of stories that you're going to use. So you're not telling the same story over and over and over and over again. And if you do it right, if you do it effectively, it's not, oh no, here comes another story from this person. It's like when you're sitting around with the old uncle or something that's always telling his stories and he just drones on and on. It's not going to be that kind of situation if you're using it right and you're using it in the right way and the right balance. So let me be clear. I'm not saying that all you ever do is tell stories as a leader. You're still going to need to have times where you say, hey, this job's got to be done. It's got to be done by here. And we got to just go. There are times when that command and control has to come in. But we overuse that. We tend to overuse the command and control, and people are left wondering, why are we doing this? So you don't have to tell any long stories and do it all the time, but to insert them at the right moments. And this just takes practice and experience and learning. It's going to capture more of the minds and hearts of your people so that they're more willing to do those things and to follow those command and control things when they have to happen.
I think sometimes people think command and control in theory is easier than, continuously to have to bring people along. But it's just interesting to me. I mean, let's circle back to, you talked about the why earlier, and the why is important to me, especially, like people come to me, Mark, and they'll say, hey, we want to do a podcast or we want to do a blog or whatever. And I'm like, but why? Like, yes, you should do all those things. I'm a big fan of them. I mean, we got 600 some episodes of this show alone, 700 some blog posts on christophtrapp.com. So I'm not going to argue with people who want to do that kind of thing. But why? What's your goal? Are you trying to reach awareness? Are you trying to, rank for things on your website? Are you trying to connect with people? Believe it or not, that is one huge advantage of a podcast, right? Because let's be honest. I mean, we don't even know each other. If I would just call you and said, hey, Mark, you want to hop on a 45-minute virtual coffee, you may have been like, dude, Christoph, I got like 4 workshops today. I don't have time. But if you come on my podcast, right, very different story. We still get to know each other. We still meet, but we're also live streaming, right? It's not just us having coffee. So, but why do people struggle to share the why? Is it because they don't know? Is it because they're just stuck in the do as I tell you, or what's the deal?
I think there's a couple of different reasons. And I think one of them has to do with what Chip and Dan Heath in the book Made to Stick refer to as the curse of knowledge. It's like, well, I know the why. I understand the why. You should just automatically know this. And so we assume that other people will see things exactly the same way we do. And that's not typically the case. And so we get stuck in that command and control because it's like, I already see the why. You should just know the why. And so we miss that. I think another reason that people go back to command and control, you mentioned that sometimes people think it's easier. It probably seems easier in the moment, but it's harder later on. It's harder when you have to circle back and keep trying to motivate the team and keep trying to move them forward because they don't know their purpose there. Or at the worst case scenario, you keep having to rehire people because you've lost people along the way because they haven't made that connection with you and the team. And so people will look at storytelling sometimes and saying, yeah, this is too soft for a business leader to be used as a skill. I'd say, no, it's actually more important for you to use because it's connecting with people as people. At the very outset, you were talking about retaining teams. Storytelling is a skill to use as people leadership. And as a leader, Your role is to lead people. It's to develop them. I think sometimes leaders lose sight of that. And they say, well, my goal is to make sure we hit these goals. But how do you hit those goals? You hit those goals by helping your people be successful. And storytelling is a way to get them engaged, get them into their why so they can be more successful. You mentioned talking to people who say, yeah, I want to do a podcast, and you always go back to why. I love to ask that question of podcast hosts that I'm on a podcast with. Say, why do you have this podcast? Because I get such a variety of answers. I had one person say, it's my way of getting free consulting. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I asked leading experts to come on my podcast. I asked them questions for 25 minutes. Well, I've gotten a half an hour almost of consulting time that I didn't have to pay for. That was his why. But it was a purpose that drove him to keep it going. And it may not be the same purpose as somebody else, but he had a purpose. And so if people have a purpose, they will give more of their discretionary effort. And that's what we want from our teams, is we want their best effort.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for your 20 minutes of free consulting already. But are you going to ask me why am I doing a podcast? Are you interested, like a little bit?
I usually do that offline, but if you want to share that here, I'd love to know what is your why.
So this podcast started me literally just talking into my phone and just kind of going on a walk, and I started to podcast, right? And then I started interviewing people on my phone. I was sitting on my couch interviewing Seth Godin on my phone. He was wherever he was on his computer, I guess. And so on my iPhone, it's web-based, it's not a phone call. And then I really just did it to learn, and then all of a sudden people started listening, and then live streaming. I noticed that was a thing. I was like, maybe I should do this, maybe. And then Amazon has live streaming now. So I'm like, oh, maybe we should do Amazon. So it was really it started because I wanted to learn and I wanted to see how I can use it. And then it just snowballed, and now people listen, and your friend is not incorrect. And I don't look at it that I get a half an hour free consulting, but I definitely am able to connect with people that otherwise probably wouldn't connect with me as readily, as they would be to come on a show.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot as a purpose too, that I do it so I can make connections, so I can build my business so that people know me on a more personal level. You talk about blog posts. Well, there's a difference between reading a blog post and hearing somebody talk. And so, yeah, it makes those other kind of connections. There's all sorts of whys. The why doesn't matter. What matters is that you have a why, that you understand a why. And when you're leading a team, it's to understand kind of their why too, so you can help keep them engaged in the work that you're trying to do together.
I ran into a case the other day, and that was creating an image for something for one reason. And then somebody else did something else that also needed to be done, and tried to use that same image for that thing, but it didn't work. The culture I'm in, we're just like, oh, okay, well, we got to do a new image, right? Like, let's figure out what works. But I've also been in cultures where if somebody does that, they're told, oh, follow the process, do this and do that and do whatever. How can a good leader who has that right mindset to be a master storyteller, can they change that culture? And is that necessary to not have the right or wrong culture and the more collaborative culture, if that makes sense?
Yeah. And I think the big thing is like with many new things that we're going to do, try it and see what the benefit is. I was talking a few months ago with a gentleman who works in sales. And he said the worst thing that he had to do in his job was that every other week he had to sit on a 30-minute call with his boss and explain why the numbers were where they were. And he would try to justify all these things. And then he read Master Storytelling. And so he decided, I'm going to start not just telling him what the numbers are and why I think that they're, I'm going to give him a couple of illustrations of examples of things I'm doing with my customers and things that I'm experiencing with the other members of my sales team to help illustrate these points. And he said, when he started to do that, those calls got immediately easier. And it wasn't, and if he had told his boss, you know what, I'm going to start telling you some stories in these calls, I'm sure he would have said, I don't care about your stories. I just want to hear the numbers. But by doing it, it helped the boss understand better what those numbers actually meant and why they were the way that they were. and it opened them up. So it changed the culture without specifically sitting down and saying, we're going to change the culture. We're going to go to a culture of storytelling. It's just using and integrating it as part of your everyday conversations that really makes us more human in the way that we interact with each other.
Sometimes you hear people throw around that you have to be vulnerable as a leader. Is that important as well? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, I agree that there's some vulnerability that needs to come in there. Now, it shouldn't be to the extreme of, let me tell you all my flaws and all the faults that I have and everything I've ever done wrong. But there's great lessons to be learned from the experiences that we had where we made mistakes. And sometimes those make the most powerful stories, because your role as a leader is to help them not make those same mistakes. And it does take a little vulnerability. I know it's hard sometimes as a leader to say, let me show you where I messed up. But it's not so much the mess up that you want to focus on. It's, and here's what I learned from it that I want you to be able to learn, so that you don't have to go through the same pain that I did in the way that I learned it. Years ago, I heard this great phrase. It said, wise people learn from their mistakes. Truly wise people learn from other people's mistakes. And that's what we can do, is we can help people be more wise by sharing the experiences that we've had where we've overcome problems that they may be having, and not have to have the same pains that we had in the process.
It's just very interesting. How do we get there, and how do we move forward? I'm trying to throw up the quick. Here you go. I'm seeing people are clicking over on Amazon on the Business Storytelling Show, so really appreciate that. You can listen on Amazon Music for free, and of course, if you sign up for Amazon Music, that's another plus to get your music on there. But time flies when you have fun. Mark, really appreciate you coming on, talking about master storytelling. The last minute here or so, tell me, who should reach out to? Who's like your perfect client? Who can you help the most? And once again, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. We work with a lot of business leaders and sales professionals. Those are kind of our highest levels of market. And in addition to the book, get the book. That's a great starting place. But we have a workshop that we do in a virtual format, 3 95-minute sessions that we take leaders through. And you really craft your own experiences into stories. It walks you through that process. I just finished one of those, and at the end, one of the people said, I learned that I can do this fairly quickly. I thought this was going to be a laborious process, but it's a fairly quick process to turn those experiences into stories. So that's one of the things that you'll really learn there in the workshop. I'd also invite people to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my primary social media platform. So look for Mark Carpenter and Master Storytelling, and the link of those two things will help you find me. Would love to have you follow me there, and reach out with any questions that you have about the content, about where you can use storytelling, about how it can be effective in your life. My goal is to help people lead more like humans, and storytelling is a way to get there. And so I look forward to that opportunity to work with some of your listeners as we go forward. So I appreciate the time and the opportunity to share that, Christoph.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.